This episode of Stage 9 is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek FM.
Hello and welcome to Stage 9, Trek FM show about the people who make Star Trek. I'm Mike.
I'm John.
And today we are continuing our series on Quentin Tarantino, discussing his second feature film, Pulp Fiction.
Yes.
Now, before we get started, just one little itty-bitty thing. Lindsay Beer, who's one of the writers who's in this writer's room, is on Twitter.
Yes. Yeah.
And she posted a link to the Deadline story about the writer's room, and its existence and everything. And she just, tweeted a link and said something like, "So this happened," or something along those lines, which for anyone who's still doubting the legitimacy of of this story, I mean, one of the people in the writer's room herself acknowledged that it's a real thing. So there you go. It's a real
there you
thing.
go. It's not a leaked rumor or anything like that. A person there said, "Yes, this is correct. This is true."
Yep.
Which is awesome.
That makes me very, very happy. And yes, Pulp Fiction. This is the second movie by Quentin Tarantino, continuing our series. Last week was Reservoir Dogs.
I think it was on Netflix. I don't know if it still is, but
it will be until the end of the year. Yeah.
Okay, so it is on Netflix until the end of the year. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And if you can see this film for free,
there
by
you
all
go.
means, do it.
Although I was literally just at Best Buy a few minutes ago, and they had the Blu-ray for $5. So you know what?
That's crazy. That's crazy. Like, seriously, like as much as I love to go on about how much I hate physical media, like I was walking through, and we'll come up on this film next, actually. But like, I was walking by and I saw Jackie Brown. It was like $5. I was like, I was like, that's less than lunch.
That's like the cost of a milkshake.
Doesn't have any alcohol in it or nothing.
No,
but
it's still a pretty freaking good movie, right?
It is.
So let's talk about this. Okay, this movie came out in 1994, October of 1994. Now, after Reservoir Dogs, as we discussed last week, it really kind of took the indie film world by storm. That there was a lot of buzz about that movie. A lot of people really, really loved it. It originally played at Sundance and, made a huge splash. And, basically, as is evidenced here, Tarantino kind of was given carte blanche to do whatever he wanted. And what he chose to do was Pulp Fiction. And based on the strength of Reservoir Dogs, everyone in Hollywood was basically lining up to work with this guy. I mean, we talked about how he sold his script for True Romance, which came out in the year between Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, directed by Tony Scott. He also sold his script for Natural Born Killers, which was directed by Oliver Stone, and came out like within a week of Pulp Fiction. And actors, tons of actors wanted to work with him, and he was able to get people like Bruce Willis to sign on to this thing for a very, very minimal fee or salary or whatever, because they just wanted to work with Tarantino. And Tarantino being Tarantino, even though he did have his choice of all the top tier Hollywood talent, he decided to go a little off-centered. I mean, Samuel L. Jackson, yeah, he was a working actor. He had been in like Patriot Games. He had been in some Spike Lee movies and some Scorsese movies.
Jurassic Park.
He'd
been in Jurassic Park. He was in National Lampoon's Loaded Weapon 1.
Yep. He was in Goodfellas.
Yeah, that's right. He was Sax in Goodfellas. That's right.
But he was not a name by any stretch of the imagination. And John Travolta was, a fallen star in a lot of ways. He was obviously huge in the 70s and then kind of tapered off in the 80s by doing things like Look Who's Talking, and then was basically at a low
Now, hold
point.
on. Look Who's Talking was a modest hit, Mike. We have to acknowledge that. And it also featured Bruce Willis. So in a sense, they're reunited in this film.
That's true. That's true. But he was pretty much at the low point in his career leading up to Pulp Fiction.
I would say that's a safe statement to make, yes.
And Tarantino, in something which has become like a trademark for him, revitalized his career, found not necessarily hidden talent, but maybe forgotten talent. I mean, Tarantino, not really a movie snob, someone who loves all movies, but especially the sort of B movies, the down and dirty things you find on, local TV at, 2:00 in the morning, like those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And he's mined a lot of the talent from that area of film in, these movies, which are, in this case, ranked as one of the 100 best American films of all time by the American Film Institute, winner of the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay and nominated for Best Picture and, pretty much everything else.
Yeah, Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah.
Sam Jackson, who lost it to Martin Landau.
Yeah.
And very famously, and later confirmed, because you couldn't hear the noise, but it was the way they did it was they had everybody up on screen, showing them all sitting in their seats, and people saw Jackson curse in his seat when he lost. And I remember the interview afterward where they're like, "Did you really say?" He was like, "Yeah, I was disappointed."
Yep.
And he was like, "Martin Landau's a fine actor. Congrats to him. But yeah, I was upset that I didn't win."
Fair.
Like, all right, there's a human reaction.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Uma Thurman was nominated too, I believe, for Best Supporting Actress and bunch of other nominations. And the movie debuted at the Cannes Film Festival. It won the Palme d'Or. I mean, as much as Reservoir Dogs was loved, I don't think anyone was expecting what they were going to see when they saw Pulp Fiction, and it really just blew everyone's minds. And in my mind, changed cinema. Like, I'm thinking about it. Like, I honestly think, like, whether you like it or don't like it, it is, in my mind, the single most influential film since Star Wars. Like, I can't think of anything that even comes close.
I would say that it's definitely as big a cultural landmark. Pulp Fiction to the 1990s is, I would say it's just like Seinfeld. For almost everybody wound up seeing it at some point, or at least knows it as a touchstone, a cultural reference, like The Simpsons as well, where you can't escape it. It is there. Completely agree with you. In terms of what it changed for the film landscape, I think I agree with you there too. Because, once again, you see somebody mess with narrative structure, but also that dialogue and all. I mean, Pulp Fiction, I remember seeing it for the first time. I remember it opens, and we're going to talk freely here. So if you haven't seen it, please, by all means, go see it.
Yeah.
It opens up, with them deciding to rob the diner, and that first guitar hit from Meeserloo strikes up. And I remember sitting in the theater and having this big smile on my face thinking, this is so different. I don't know what to expect over the next 2 hours. And I remember at the end of the movie, like walking out of it, it felt like I was just bouncing off the walls And I was telling everybody, you gotta see this. Everybody go. Like, I didn't get Reservoir Dogs in the theater. I got Pulp Fiction in the theater, and I was on fire about Pulp Fiction. Sam Jackson immediately became one of my favorite actors of all time. I wound up seeing it a number of times in the movie theater, and I am convinced that it contributed to the downfall of my relationship at the time, because her question, so what are you going to do? See Pulp Fiction? Haven't we seen? Yeah, but it's awesome. I fixated on Pulp Fiction. I saw it at least 4 or 5 times in the movie theater. And I remember each theater that I saw it in, and I remember at the end of every showing just on fire about how great it was and how much I loved it. It's an amazing film. Absolutely amazing.
So, okay, you were a Reservoir Dogs fan to begin with. Do you remember the build-up? Because, I mean, that's the thing, is it won the Palme d'Or in March, and it didn't come out until October. So there were like a good 7 months where there was all of this buzz from these people who had seen it over in France, talking about how it was going to, be a Best Picture nominee and all this stuff. And, the hype just kept on building and building and building. So as someone who was a Reservoir Dogs fan, do you remember that hype?
Yeah, I do remember the hype. I remember the buildup being huge. I remember, for me and for a couple of my friends, the anticipation was through the roof for this. And it only was even more so because we had seen True Romance, and I loved True Romance too. Like, going into this, I knew he hadn't directed True Romance, but I knew he had written it. And going in, and Sam Jackson's in that too, in a very small part, by the way. Like that, I was riding a wave. Like, I'm reasonably certain, and they didn't have Thursday night preview shows, but I'm reasonably certain that the first showing I could possibly get to, I was in that theater, planted and ready for it. And it's still, I mean, that's something that is very much on everybody's minds with, say, the new Star Wars movie, is people say, well, your anticipation is so high. That's, it can't meet this, or don't go in with such high expectations. Everybody went into Pulp Fiction with high expectations because, like you said, they'd been hammering the buzz for this. This is a great film. You're going to love this film. It's an amazing film. This is going to, knock your socks off. And we still walked in and walked out and said, it knocked my socks off. That's an amazing film, and I loved it.
So your experience, I think, was a little bit different from mine, because here you are. You said that you had this anticipation building up and everything like that, and you got to see it right away, and you were sort of like part of the people who were, fueling that hype, right?
Yes, and absolutely.
For me, it was a lot different, because at that point in time, 1994, I could not care less about movies per se. I was a Star Trek fan. I had come to Star Trek through Star Wars, and 94 was the year of Star Trek. It almost parallels it exactly. Like, March of 94 is when Pulp Fiction debuts at Cannes, and October is when it actually is released in the U.S. and everywhere else. Whereas, for Star Trek, everyone knew that Next Generation was ending, right? And that we had Generations coming out at the end of the year. So, there's this whole build-up to the finale of Next Gen, which ends with All Good Things in May and leaves everyone on a high. And then you've got to wait until November to see Generations. And the way that the film world was sort of anticipating Pulp Fiction very closely mirrors what was going on with me personally in terms of Star Trek. And what's really interesting about it is, Pulp Fiction is one of a couple movies which really sort of pushed me over the edge to become much more of a film fan than a Star Trek fan. But we'll get into that in a second. But yeah, you're right about in terms of it being just sort of this indie thing, and you being there opening day and people going back to see it a million times, it was a small movie. It cost like $8 million, $10 million or something like that, and it made over $100 million. It was a massive blockbuster, which crossed over in ways that these things don't. It just doesn't happen, especially for like an R-rated, indie movie, which is very, very cutting edge. And it really did penetrate the culture, with the whole thing with the Oscars. I mean, the big thing that year was it was like Forrest Gump versus Pulp Fiction, and
Yeah.
everything was about like which side do you fall on, whereas one is sort of like all about Americana and
Yeah.
a return to sort of like strong values and everything like that, and the other one was basically tearing all of that away and just giving you this adrenaline shot to the heart. You know what I mean?
I would offer that the two complement each other in terms of this Americana thing. Okay, because Forrest Gump is this idealized stroll through history of how one person can make all the stuff that Forrest Gump is about. But it's very clean. It's very, universally accessible sort of thing. But Pulp Fiction is basically the entertainment we were all, you would go to school and you'd dress nice and you'd behave in public and everything. But Pulp Fiction was what you were reading when you got your homework done, or it was what you were watching when you went out with your friends and that sort of thing. So I think that they work perfectly as flip sides of the same coin. Like it's this amazing duality that every culture has, where it's like you have, your rules of engagement in the business workspace or in the public square. But then when you go home, you might be a great person out there, but everybody likes to indulge and watch, an action movie with tons of people getting killed and blown up and everything like that. Because there's that dark side that you indulge when you're, with your entertainment. So maybe it's a reach to say that, but I think it's actually kind of beautifully poetic that they paired up like that.
Yeah. Forrest Gump in the streets, Pulp Fiction in the sheets. It's basically
there
what
you
you're
go.
saying.
I like that. There you go. Yeah.
No, and it should be said, like, here, okay, and I should have pitched this earlier, whatever, but I know I feel like I'm just selling things, but whatever. I'm trying to expose people to things which, because I've lived this series as you have, and anyway, there's this, it's a whole series of books where it's interviews with filmmakers, and it's nothing but a collection of interviews from the course of their careers, compiled into a book. I mean, there's not any new interviews or anything. It's just from all sorts of weird different sources, usually put in the order of their careers. So it sort of goes like movie by movie. And I think they're just called, I mean, it'll literally be like, Quentin Tarantino interviews or George Lucas interviews or whatever. There's a ton of them, and I highly, highly recommend all of them because they're all amazing. But the Tarantino one is obviously really cool too. And one of the things that they have in there in sort of like the Pulp Fiction era is this joint interview that was done right around the time of the Oscars with Tarantino and the director of Forrest Gump, Robert Zemeckis, where the two of them were kind of sat down to discuss this whole issue, this whole like, are you a fan of Pulp Fiction or a fan of Forrest Gump and everything? And one of the things that comes through, of course, in the interview is that Tarantino loved Forrest Gump and Zemeckis loved Pulp Fiction, and as far as they were concerned, there wasn't really anything more than like a friendly competition going around, but they were much more supportive of each other than competitive in that regard.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's just a thing. But all of this happened, and all of this was stuff that I was sort of aware of as I was with the help of Generations and sort of like falling in love with the theatrical experience through Generations, which was the first movie that I went to see on the Thursday night preview and everything like that, and sort of wanting to replicate that experience as much as I could, having seen it 4 times in the theater and everything, learning about what THX is and all this other stuff.
Turn it up.
Yep. I was sort of getting all of this sort of like residual Pulp Fiction stuff, hitting me from just whatever from the landscape or whatever, and as I was sort of like becoming a movie fan and broadening my horizons with things like, okay, I'm going to watch the Indiana Jones movies now. Okay, I'm going to dip my toe into James Bond, that sort of thing. Nothing super hardcore, it's like, okay, I'm going to watch some classics like Casablanca and, Hitchcock or whatever. But I hadn't gone into the world of indie cinema aside from Kevin Smith, which had that sort of like Star Wars and geek culture connection. But Pulp Fiction was always there, and it was one of those things where I think because of the people who were sort of like became my mentors in terms of film, which were more than anyone these two guys who I worked at the comic book store with, Mike and Josh, who were Josh was 7 years older than me and Mike was 10 years older than me, and I sort of took my cues from them. And neither of them liked Pulp Fiction. They thought it was overrated and, all this other stuff. And because of that, it was like one of those things where I didn't have someone personally saying, you've got to see this movie. I had someone saying, like, that's for, the hipsters or whatever they were called back in the 90s. That movie's overrated. That's not a good movie. Here's all the problems. I think
poser would have been the term back then.
What was that?
Would have been poser.
Poser? Okay, poser, yeah. So, it took me a while to finally say, like, I'm going to watch this thing, after it came out on video. And it was in early 96, so a little more than a year after the movie came out. And I was 16 years old, and I decided, like, okay, today's going to be the day. I'm going to rent Pulp Fiction from Windy City Video and watch it. And I got it, and it was the type of thing where, like, I was 16, and, like, my parents weren't censoring my viewing habits, but there were things which I didn't necessarily want to, announce that I was watching.
Oh, I know the waters you're talking about, Mike. I sure do. Yeah.
So, I'm like, I got the movie, and I had like a TV, with the, VHS player and a Laserdisc player at that point up in my bedroom. And I'm like, I'm going to, wait until late at night when everyone's asleep, and I'm going to watch it with the sound turned down really low. I had the sound turned down so low, and I was like, literally, I guess I hadn't thought about using headphones at this point in time, but whatever. I was literally like inches away from the television screen, and I started it up, and I was just completely enraptured by this movie. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't move a muscle, because I was so hooked by what I was seeing. It was it was insane. It was like transformative, in a lot of ways. I've never seen anything like it. I remember that vividly. I remember, like, there was one moment which was like incredibly shocking, when it happened. I jumped back, from the TV because it was just like overwhelming, and it was like, in a lot of ways, even though it seems like the worst possible way to watch a movie on pan and scan VHS on a crappy TV with the volume turned down really low and sitting very, very close to the screen. In a lot of ways, I think that might have been like the absolute best way for me to watch it the first time,
Totally immersed, man. I love that. And the thing is, as you're talking about it, two memories from seeing it at the time come up. One is the very popular not conspiracy theory, but like the very popular read that navigated the waters back then was that in the briefcase was Marcellus Wallace's soul.
Yeah.
And John Travolta and Sam Jackson were going to go get it. Now, when you think about it, that's just dumb.
See, but I love that. Like, that's still what I think of.
No, like, I'm not saying I didn't love it. I'm just saying, like, it's one of those things where it's like, it's not his soul. That's totally not what this movie is about. And I remember Avery, the co-writer, totally dashing my expectations, because they asked Tarantino and Avery, and they said, so what's in the briefcase? And of course, Tarantino being Tarantino, he's giving like, it doesn't matter, it's like a MacGuffin. He starts giving his, film lecture lesson. And then Avery laughs and he just goes, 4 AA batteries. And I was like, jerk face, don't do that. And I also remember a friend of mine not liking the movie and saying it was overrated. He was in the Forrest Gump camp, but he hated the fact that the last 2 stories are told in reverse timeline order, basically. And he insisted it was, the people have been manipulated because they have a good feeling when they walk out because John Travolta hasn't died, and he got so mad about it and it didn't make sense and he didn't like anything like that. And I just remember it boiling down to where he said, it's manipulative. It's so that when they walk out at the end, the audience is still happy and they're not blah, 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 blah. And I remember looking at him and saying, so? Yeah. Good. Yeah, that is the point. Mm-hmm. They want you to be happy. And I'm like, but also how beautiful is it that you have these first 2 stories and then you have this third story where John Travolta just dies, seemingly for no reason. But then you get the story as to why it's important that he died the way that he did. Because Sam Jackson left by that point because of this, conversion moment where he believes that the angels have come down and interceded in his life and he's going to walk the earth like Kane from Kung Fu. Like, it's so much better. Like, you have that moral. And it's so, I think that is one of the things that I think makes Pulp Fiction work so incredibly well, is you have hitmen and drug dealers and all of these awful people. And then you are left at the end with the one guy who gets it together. And he doesn't just have this conversion moment and say, hey, everything's peachy keen and I don't regret anything that I did. I will always love that moment. The truth is, Ringo, you're the weak, and I'm the tyranny of evil men. But I'm trying, Ringo. I'm trying real hard to be the shepherd. I remember when that line dropped the first time I saw it, it was almost life-changing, where it was, you had a character basically say, my sins are not forgotten, but I'm doing what I can to change. Like, it's such an amazing moment for this character in this particular story arc. It's just wonderful. I mean, I became such a Sam Jackson fan after this. And I remember him saying years later that he almost lost the part, that Tarantino wanted him, but then apparently somebody else came in and read, and he said he never found out who it was. But all of a sudden he got called back to reread the line, to, audition again, and he started to get nervous. And he said the scene was him talking to Ringo, and he said that was the way he delivered it in that final audition when he thought he was going to lose it because he knew he had to bring it. And he said, and that basically just went right into the movie the way I did it. And I was like, well, I can understand why you got the part then, because I can't imagine anybody else delivering it that way. It's amazing. Sorry, I know I'm rambling, but that's part of the magic of this movie.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah, and he's not the only person who almost wasn't cast in the movie. John Travolta is another one, because that role was originally meant for Michael Madsen, who played Vic Vega in Reservoir Dogs, and this is Vincent Vega. The theory, externally, is that they're brothers, and the only reason why Michael Madsen didn't do the movie was because he had signed on to play the dad in Free Willy, and they wouldn't let him out of his contract.
That's a tough one, man. That is a tough one.
I know, right?
That is a real, and I think part of the legend too was that Travolta sealed the deal because he went over to Tarantino's house and had to play like a Welcome Back Kotter board game or something like that when he first met Tarantino. If that story is true, I would say that's probably Tarantino testing him to see how chill he's going to be, like whether he's going to be a pleasure to work with or not. Like I can see Tarantino setting up those little traps for people to be like, let's see how they react in an uncomfortable situation and see, what they're really like.
I can see that for sure too. I think when you get to that level, he knows Travolta. He knows what Travolta's capable of. He knows what he's going to get from Travolta. I think more than anything, he doesn't really need Travolta to audition. It's just, when you're making a movie, you're spending a lot of time with these people, and you want to make sure that there is some sort of chemistry, amongst everyone. So, yeah, I can totally see that.
I've always found it so intriguing too that there are so many actors who do continue to work with Tarantino and love working with Tarantino, and then there are certain actors who don't come back for whatever reason. And I like, I'm not going to play armchair psychiatrist, but I can't imagine, like if I can totally get Sam Jackson. It's very obvious that Sam Jackson's on speed dial, and Tarantino calls him up and is like, hey, Sam, I got it. Yeah, sure thing. Just, send it to my agent. Let me know when you need me. I got a couple of weeks. So, I can only be the piano player in Kill Bill this time because I only got a couple of days. Okay, great. Well, you'll at least be in it or something like that. And then Hateful Eight comes up and is like, Sam, I need you for this. You're the only person that can do this. Well, all right then. That's fine. So.
Yeah, for sure. And there's definitely, I think, a lot of people like that. Harvey Keitel, of course, is another one. And, and you also see, like, as filmmakers' careers progress, you see them work with the same people. Some people, like, sort of drop off, and other people come back up. I think it's probably the same with any job. Hey, podcasting. I think that's. Yeah. Hey, we do 2 podcasts together, right?
We do.
That's You find what's a good fit, you stick with it.
That's right. And you create a dynasty. So we're the Tarantinos of podcasting.
There you go. So, any final thoughts on Pulp Fiction? There's so much to talk about, and it's impossible to cover all of it. It's something that you just have to see, I think.
I agree. I think that this is a necessary film to watch. I think it's a wonderful film to watch. I think it's an incredible film. But I think even if you wind up not liking it, because there are going to be people who don't like things, again, as part of this build-up to Tarantino's Star Trek, I would say look again for what it is that his film brings, which is chemistry, dialogue, pacing. 3 key things to keeping an audience engaged. And this is only his second film. And you see, even just between, we looked at Reservoir Dogs, and that's a very small scale, shot basically in a location overall, just a bunch of people acting like a stage play. And then he goes to number 2, he gets a little bit of money, and he says, I'm going to multiple locations, I'm screwing up the timeline, and everything's going crazy. So you instantly see, I think you see somebody that's a great fit for a sci-fi type of franchise, because when he gets access to more materials and more money, he doesn't say, well, this is what worked before. He says, what can I make work now? And I think that's exciting. That's exciting to watch with any filmmaker. What about you? Any other?
No, what you're saying is totally true, and I guess what we're talking about really is the idea of world building. He has a knack for world building, as they say in La La Land. And, that was something that kept on running through my mind when I was watching it this week. Was like, this is a world which, yes, it is based in reality, and it feels very real, but one of the reasons why I think it feels very real is because of all of sort of like the little details which he adds to it, and it's not at all sterile. It feels lived in. It feels like a complete universe, and the characters who inhabit it. There are regular people milling about, but they're in the background. What we're seeing is really almost like an alien group of characters, all of these like gangsters and people who are sort of like on the edges of the law in one way or another. And we don't deal with any real people in this thing. It very much is sort of like a science fiction movie, like you're saying. And, I mean, we'll see this throughout his career, especially when we get out of his movie universe and into his movie universe, which we'll get into in a few weeks. But, he definitely creates these sort of like hyper-realistic alternate realities. And there's really not that much difference between what he's doing and what, the creators of Star Trek have been doing for the past 50 years. So I think that, he is very much suited to that particular set of skills which is needed in creating a Star Trek movie. So, yeah, you're definitely right about that. I mean, here's the thing, and this is something, I use this quote all the time. It's a Tarantino quote where he's talking about not a Tarantino movie, but another movie which he loves, a movie which he finds inspiration from, and that's Fight Club. And, in his discussions on that movie, he talks about how when he saw it, it was like a diamond bullet to his brain. And I mean, that's like that's a Tarantino line right there, if there ever was one. But because it's so vivid in the imagery which it evokes or whatever. But that's what Pulp Fiction was to the world. Certainly, what it was to me. It sounds like to you as well. A diamond bullet to my brain. But that's pretty much all I have to say about it for now.
The only thing I'll tack on is if you like his statement about diamond bullet to the brain, I trust you have heard his brief recap synopsis assessment of There Will Be Blood by Paul Thomas Anderson.
I'm not sure I have heard. I maybe have heard it. I know that he considers Paul Thomas Anderson to be his main competitor, and every time he makes a movie, he's just trying to one up Paul Thomas Anderson.
You should hear his I think it's on YouTube. It's like 7 or 10 minutes long, where he talks about talking with Anderson and what he sees in There Will Be Blood and the scenes that speak to him, and it's so quintessentially Tarantino. Like it's really cool, really cool. Highly recommend it.
I'll have to check that out for sure.
And I recommend it for anybody else after they watch Pulp Fiction.
Yes, and please watch Pulp Fiction because it's awesome. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been fun talking about Pulp Fiction today, but that's not all we're talking about on Trek FM this week. So here's a look at what you may have missed elsewhere on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm, The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
Even with the animated show, I know it was Gene Roddenberry's wish that the animated show not be considered canon, but so much of what we know about Star Trek comes from the animated show, what Kirk's, the name is, and what, to hear Tiberius, I think, for the first time is in the animated show, if I'm not mistaken.
The Orb.
But also, Rom, in the end, obviously kind of has a heart of gold. He's a guy who just wants to take care of people. He really likes people. And that's kind of who Lita is, too. And so they're really kind of kindred spirits.
To the journey!
And Chakotay looks amazing in his fatigues.
He does.
Hands down.
He does.
Everyone likes a man in uniform, yes.
Well, unless it's a Nazi uniform, then no.
Or a woman in uniform.
Yes.
We're an equal opportunities podcast.
Earl Grey.
So this goes, I chose from Justice. It's a Wesley moment. I knew I was gonna catch flack for that. No, it's not a Wesley moment. I was actually thinking about doing that, but yeah, no.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out these shows and join the larger conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button on Apple Podcasts and on your iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV or the desktop iTunes app and get the latest episodes as soon as they're published. And please leave us a star rating and a written review. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, and in most third-party apps. and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link as well. If you want to contact us, we'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place to join the larger conversation is the Babel Conference, which is our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, that's Babel, into the search field on Facebook, and we should come right up. If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact, choose Send to Show, and select Stage 9. That will come right to us. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. John, where can people find you on the internet?
Look for Kessel Junkie. That's who I am online. You can also find me co-hosting Words with Nerds with my pal Craig. And if you go over to thenerdparty.com, you can go ahead and you can find Aggressive Negotiations, which I co-host with Matthew Rushing, and Great Shot Kid, which I co-host with you, Mike.
Yeah, you can find me over there, and you can also find me on my website, commentarytrackstars.com, doing a show called Commentary Trackstars. And you can find me on Trek.fm doing a show called The Edge. And you can also find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K. We'd like to thank our associate producers today, Jeff Sutter, Chris Steftenagel, and Norman C. Lau.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. If you'd like to be like Chris, Jeff, and Norm, head on over to patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM and become a patron of the network. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month. We really appreciate any support you can give us and hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all the details at patreon.com/TrekFM. All right. Well, that's it for Pulp Fiction. That was the big one, his masterpiece in a lot of ways. I'm not necessarily sure I think it's his best movie, but it's hard to argue that. It's like arguing that Citizen Kane is not the best movie of all time. It's the Citizen Kane of Quentin Tarantino movies, for sure.
I think that's a fair comment.
Well, next week we're going to shift gears quite a bit and take a look at a movie which he doesn't even consider to be one of his, eventual 10. But it's a movie which he did have a hand in directing nonetheless. And it is a New Year's movie, too. So the timing is absolutely perfect. And so is the movie. It's called 4 Rooms. So tune in next week and check it out.